place. And we actually had a name for it. It's called the Group. And we started talking about it, and Jay was going to write it. He's the one with a more imaginative, fictive, facility than me, But the story didn't come quite get together. And at some point, I came over here, I'm trying to remember, in 2009 when I was taking the Easter Cloud,
Yeah.
Those 2 months I actually wrote
Switched.
what I thought was a novel,
We're KGB. My bad. Yeah, KGB.
Roman Clef, based on my own life. And one of the people who read it was Jay. He didn't think it was too good. And then I went to see a friend of mine organized a literal agent, one of the most powerful here in New York. Forgot the name, but her last name is Phil. She's done virtually all the important black writers. That's a bailiwick. Important black personalities. Now, one of the things I suspect I did, because I've got a big mouth, I'm in politics, So I sit there with her and I give her the manuscript. And we end up talking about Quincy Troop. Quincy Troop is the one who did Miles Davis biography, And he had taught me literature and memoir writing at the University of California, San Diego, So I say to him, I'm going to go and see Quincy, uptown. He lives in Harlem. And then I decided to tell a story that Quincy told me about a guy called Stanley Crouch. Stanley Crouch used to be a writer for the Village Voice. He was a rambunctious, nasty piece of work, a hater, if not. He's Wynton Marsalis's mentor. But when Wynton Marsalis first came to New York as a 19-year-old, fresh out of New Orleans, a little rusticated, a rustic, So the people who took care of Wynton Marsalis here were 3 people. Ralph Ellison, one called his last name was Mary, but he did a book called Stomping at the Savoy, And then the other one was Stanley Crouch. Now, these guys, what distinguished them was they were classicists, neoclassicists. Everything they did in terms of sartorial, in terms of literary, in terms of music. So Miles Davis, who was a subversive transgressive, you'd remember Miles Davis moved away from, if you like, bebop, hard bop, cool, modern, into electronic music, fusion, with Bitches Brew. And that generated a chasm in Tanzania. Miles Davis' rationale for doing Bitches Brew was that I have to be in tune with the times. America was in tumult at the time. This is the 60s. There was Woodstock, there was Motown, there was Flower Power, there was all of these things. And he says, the idea that Jimi Hendrix, who's a diverse punk, fills up stadiums, and me, Miles Davis, who's a graduate of Juilliard, not graduate, he was a dropout at Juilliard, but talented musician, and we all know Miles Davis, The idea that I have to play in some back alley club, and this punk is filling stadiums. He said, what is, there's no patches. It is actually elitism. We must be in tune with the moment we're in. And the others said he was a sellout for doing that, And one of the people who became essentially they issued a fatwa, the classicists issued a fatwa that Miles Davis has to be banned, barbecued, at the stake for selling out to rock and popular sensibilities. the apogee of this is Quincy Troop writes a book, Miles Davis' book, 1989. And Stanley Clark writes in Rolling Stone a review of the book. And the title of the review, Miles' Sketches of Pain. You know, Miles Davis did Sketches of Pain, one of his most famous albums in 1960. Sketches of Pain, Miles Davis, the most talented sellout there ever was. Quincy Troop was Stanley Crouch's friend, and they come up together as poets and writers in what was then called the Watts Collective, you know, in South Central Los Angeles. Poets and writers, people like Ishmael Reed and all of these people. Stanley Crouch accuses, in the same review, Quincy Troop of plagiarism. Now I say, you know,
Ted.
is that Ted? Yeah. Gee, man, I didn't recognize you. You know? I haven't seen you in 8 years. I haven't seen any of these guys since 2016. You know? Ted, you caught me midstream, man. And you can't stop my flow. You know? I got to move, man. You know, that's the price of coming late. You know what I'm saying?
I was waiting at the
You
other
know
place
me?
for half an
Yeah,
hour.
man, you know. What happens when you're late?
You at other place?
All right, can I go on now, guys?
Yes.
You know, it's not cool to stop a solo. You know, I'm riffing here, man. You know. At any rate, so Quincy Troop. So I said, but why would you say that when you're friends? He says, because Stanley Crouch is evil, man. He's an evil motherfucker. You know why? Because he's ugly, man. He's ugly. You know, he's an ugly, muggly motherfucker. You know? So I tell this story to this woman. Phil, I'm trying to proposition to be my agent, my literary agent. Unbeknownst to me that she's Stanley Crouch's friend. So she says, in response to what I was just saying, she says, oh yeah, he's irascible. Irascible. I'm like, no, he's not irascible, he's evil. That's what Quincy said, you know? At any rate, she had said, I'm going to read the manuscript and you'll hear from me. I never heard from her. I tried to call. My calls were not returned. Now, I didn't know if it was what I said or it was the quality of the manuscript. Well, later on, Jay read it and says, "Pal, so your fictive imagination needs to be developed, you know." And even my wife said, just stick to non-fiction, you know. That's your game. Fiction is not your thing, you know. At any rate, I'm just saying, I was in a you know, I'm long-winded trying to say this is what Jay and I have been trying to do. And I'm grateful for what you've organized. Let me kick off, Jay. Introduction. Exile is strangely compelling to think about, but terrible to experience. It is the unhealable rift forced between a human being and a native place, between the self and its true home. Its essential sadness can never be surmounted. This is a quote from Edward Said, Reflections on Exile. Sukra, no problem. How are you?
Didn't even recognize you.
Jay, can we MC? We need to finish this.
So we have here the introduction to Oyama's book. He opens with a paragraph from Edward Said talking about exile, which is a subject that Oyama personally knows and many people in South Africa know. Exile metaphorically and literally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I go home?
Yes, yes.
The notion of home, what some have referred to as the tyranny of place, has long consumed and preoccupied philosophers. During our struggle for freedom, the rallying cry in the 1950s was the slogan, Maibuye Africa, come back Africa, denoting our yearning for the return of our home Africa from those who had stolen it from us through colonial dispossession. Later, when the liberation movements were forced into exile, there was a physical separation from that home. So for us, this quest for home has been a perennial odyssey, reminiscent of the epic poem by Homer, the Odyssey, which traces the journey home by the Greek hero Odysseus, king of Ithaca, following the Trojan War. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Initially, when we were still physically home, we yearned for our home, which had been wrenched away from us by the colonizers. And when we were forced into exile, uprooted from that geographic space we call home, we longed for the physical return to that geographic space. In the epigraph above, Edward Said is referring to the latter exile, the unbearable rift forced between a human being and a native place. But as I will argue below, exile goes beyond the physical separation from a native place. In my construction, it goes to the fundamental alienation of the self from an ontological home. One can be in exile while physically home. That is alienated from the true values that constitute a home. A home is not a house, or a house is not a home. You know that thing? The subversion of values, meaning, and purpose results in nihilism and psychic death. In July 2015, Bob O'Malley, professor of literature and jazz studies at Columbia University in New York, delivered a lecture at Gallery Momo in Johannesburg. Professor O'Malley was on our shores as part of his global traveling exhibition on the work of the artist Roma Bearden, one of the artistic forces behind the Harlem Renaissance, who is also celebrated for his portraiture of the Jazz Age and the Civil Rights Movement in the United States. During a question and answer session with Professor O'Malley, I put forward a question that seemed to have been misunderstood by our interlocutor and program director, Dr. Tembingosi Goniwe, and many in the audience. Why is it, I asked, that diaspora intellectuals and artists such as Roma Bearden, in his Black Odyssey series, and Nobel Prize laureate Derek Walcott, in his celebrated epic poem, Homeros, insist on the Homeric tropes and echoes of homecoming in their art, a theme that seems to be a fixture and staple of diasporic artistic and intellectual preoccupation and imagination, from Du Bois to Garvey, and yet this theme remains largely absent from the work of continental artists and intellectuals, certainly in the recent past. That was my question. I continued. This imaginary may have indeed been a theme of our exilic assertion. We are going back home. But no one seems preoccupied with the theme of homecoming anymore. And yet for me, akin to Professor O'Malley's argument in his opening address, homecoming is not only a spatial construct, coming back to a physical or geographic space. Homecoming is a much more profound and metaphysical concept. It is coming back to a desired place, a place of loftiness, a sanctuary from our harried and grubby present, a place that offers comfort and succor. And in our context here in South Africa, it would mean coming back to that place that midwifed our freedom, the place that produced Nelson Mandela, Steve Biko, and Chris Hani. So homecoming for us is our imagined values and futures, our better self. I admit that my question may have come across as meandering and abstruse, but a fair number of folks seem to understand what I was training to say and where I was going with the question. I soon encountered a lot of anguished voices asking, how do we go back home indeed, comrade? How do we go back to that place of loftiness that had made us synonymous with the idea of freedom and justice? The quest for home, I had touched some nerve. I began to reflect on this over time. Is it reasonable to expect a people or a movement to remain suspended in loftiness? Is civic virtue not a temporary condition, contingent on certain material conditions, something that is accessible as a resource for struggle, but seldom has anything to do with the transaction of politics and statecraft? This is in many respects the question at the heart of political discourse in our country. There is a perennial fascination and lament about how and why the African National Congress, the ANC, the midwife of freedom and justice in South Africa, so quickly morphed into a feral rabble, solely preoccupied with material enrichment at the expense of the people they did everything to champion, including being ready to pay the ultimate sacrifice, dying for the cause of freedom. This brings us to the next logical question. Were these freedom fighters fighting for the so-called people, the mythical masses of our people, or were they fighting for their self-actualization as human beings, which the apartheid reality was both negating and impeding? And now, with the apartheid fetter swept aside, could self-actualization include the rapacious pursuit of material wealth? Is not getting filthy rich a universal siren song of the neoliberal epoch inaugurated by the triumph of capital in 1989 and the collapse of socialist pretensions and piety? As ANC activist and diplomat Smart Oyama once observed, I did not struggle to be poor.
Can I interject with one story? So Oyama, freedom fighter, everything, at one point, he's telling me he's in South Africa driving a BMW convertible. I said, Oyama, how'd this happen? And he said, Jay, I suffered.
I didn't struggle to be poor.
Sell out.
I don't struggle to be poor.
You know, could he have been articulating a zeitgeist that, while politically inelegant, was incontestably true? Is there a place for loftiness in a normalized society and politics? Aren't people transported to that lofty place only in times of national crises, such as war or the struggle for national liberation? And in those unique moments of valor and humanity, as when a passerby leaps into roiling waters to save a drowning child, or a citizen runs into a burning building to rescue an infirm granny trapped on the top floor. Are such heroic feats the stuff of normalcy, or is the quest for material wealth more in keeping with the normal human condition? And if the latter is true, why are we so outraged by those at the helm of our new dispensation who mirror this human condition? Now we may argue that the ANC's electoral platform speaks of a better life for all and not for a better life for us. But surely the ANC has indisputably transformed the lives of our people for the better, at least for a while, until the collapse presaged by the 9 wasted years of the Zupta Imperium, which we are still vainly trying to obviate. The work of the ANC, especially in the early years of the new democracy, has given many people a sense of dignity and justice. And in a struggling economy, buffeted by a global economic meltdown, the social grant system, that is our welfare system, whilst increasingly onerous and burdensome on the fiscus, has made the difference between survival and utter destitution for many families. Are we not holding the ANC to an unfair and unattainable standard, one achievable only under conditions of a national emergency? One of the most iconoclastic intellects in this country, Mwelezi Mbeki. Mwelezi Mbeki is brother to Thabo Mbeki, but he's a Trotskyite, he's a contrarian, he's invested in being a contrarian, you know. He's a friend of mine. He argues that the ANC delivered its historic mandate with the adoption of the Constitution in 1996. Then, having reached its apogee with that achievement, the ANC normalized, becoming preoccupied with what political parties are normally preoccupied with, patronage. Were we perhaps unfair in expecting the comrades to demonstrate supernatural revolutionary qualities of abstinence and asceticism while everyone around them was engaged in normal human pursuits, including partaking of the opportunity afforded by conditions of freedom for personal material advancement? Or had we ourselves perhaps become so disengaged from the vocation of an engaged citizenry to hold accountable those who rule over us, that we expected them to miraculously, in defiance of what was normal, and to remain perennially lofty, to keep marching to the drum of struggle when the struggle was long over? Dr. Martin Luther King famously stated that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But that arc does not bend by itself. Social forces and an engaged citizenry are responsible for the bending towards justice. I've argued elsewhere that the ANC, infatuated with its self-importance and vanguardist pieties, made a fatal mistake in making itself the portal for material success as it sought to referee who was up or down in the black economic empowerment game under the guise of creating a patriotic bourgeoisie. In so doing, the ANC made itself ineluctably the prize to be captured in the titanic contest for material success by a people who had been excluded for eons from the mainstream of economic activity. And since the ANC had by its election made itself the pivot around which the de-racialization of the South African economy would unfold, those who were skilled at the political game leveraged that for business dominance. This, in fact, became the political economy of the new South Africa, with the ANC at the center of business action. And because capitalism, by its nature, is a private as opposed to a social enterprise, at least with regard to whom the spoils of economic activity accrue, the ANC found itself rent and riven by the logic of this privatization, which was necessarily a zero-sum game. If your faction or network was ascended within the ANC, your reward was material benefit. If it was in decline, you were out and would proverbially be prevented from eating lunch in this town again. In a sense, those were the battle lines as the two gladiators, Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma, faced off in the epic battle of Pologwane. On Mbeki's side were those who were perceived to have benefited from his reign and were impressed with his stewardship of the ship of state, while on Zuma's side were those intent, the Mbekyites, in the gilded cage. Among the latter mentioned names, allied to an assortment of folks who had been hurt one way or another by Mbeki's long reign atop our government. Hence the moniker, the Coalition of the Wounded. And to Zulu nationalists, aggrieved by the 40th dominance of the ANC by Xhosa-speaking people. In the end, the ANC was the prize to be won. You capture the ANC, and you're on your way to the bank. This was the new frontier, the new site of struggle, as the ANC was fond of saying. My rumination on and protestation about normalcy notwithstanding, it is abundantly clear that something has indeed gone terribly awry in the Rainbow Nation. That's what we call South Africa. We had, after all, started on a dizzyingly high note, what with a laudatory constitution, overwhelming international goodwill. Remember, you guys, the entire global community, cheered us into existence. The Anti-Apartheid movement was the biggest international solidarity movement ever. And the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act of 1986 passed here because you guys, as students, marched at Brown. Where were you at? Princeton. Yes. But you know, just like on the issue of Gaza, college kids transformed the universities into battlegrounds for freedom and justice for South Africa. And weirdly, a Republican-controlled Senate, 1986 October, the Senate was under Republican control, overrode a presidential veto by Reagan. One of the first times, I think there were only 3 times, it has happened in the past century, I don't know now. But in 1986, it was only the 3rd time since the establishment of the Republic that a presidential veto had been overridden. As you know, it takes 2/3 to overcome a veto. And you know what? Even Dan Quayle, who was a senator from Indiana at the time, voted for the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act. This is what you guys did for us. That's why I'm saying South Africa is a product of global engagement with our pain, with our suffering. So when we go awry, people feel pain. I know how Charles feels. Pain. I know a lot of people, Harry Belafonte, pain. what has happened to this great success story. You know, I was with Ochoro, we were together at Obama's inauguration, yeah? So I meet this guy who was a partner at one of the DC law firms. He opened one of these firms that opened in South Africa, what was it called? Whatever, one of the Wall Street law firms. So he had been, the partner in South Africa who opened their practice. And then he had joined Cat and Bob's or one of those, So he comes to me at the inauguration and he says, Oyama, damn man, can you explain? From 1994, 15 years later, you have a diverse punk, Jacob Zuma as president. What the fuck is wrong with you, man? I say, you know what? This is how democracy works, at least internally into democracy. A powerful potentate like Thabo Mbeki, in other countries in Africa, you have to shoot him. That's a fact. You have to shoot the motherfucker. Because once they are ensconced in office, like Museveni, they will do everything to rig and stay in power. That's the African game. Mbeki was defenestrated by his own party and gracefully accepted it. He could have called in the army and dispatched it to arrest Jacob Zuma and his supporters. He didn't do that. So I say, democracy doesn't always produce perfect outcomes. What it does is give people a voice. So respect our voice even when it's wrong. Just like you guys here in America. You voted for George W. Bush, a diverse punk twice. Diverse punk twice. You know, because American democracy play. Okay, you can claim that the first one was actually given to him by his father's appointment. The Supreme Court, of course, gave it to George W. Bush. But second time around, you guys voted for a fucking punk. Just like the ANC voted for a punk. So spare me the piety. Spare me the bullshit. That is how democracy works. And you know what? Here, this is how democracy works. Because after the ravages of George W. Bush, what does this country produce? A once in a lifetime development. The election of a black president. Think about it. I mean, amazing grace. A guy by the name of Barack Hussein Obama defeating a war hero in this country. A great grandson of Admiral. A punk from Luo. Because we are Ochoro's people. You know, we say in Kenya, a Luo will be a president in America, but never in Kenya. The game is fixed against Luo. So Obama comes from Luo stock. The father was Luo. He became president of the most powerful republic in history. I think it was more powerful than Rome, huh? Am I right, Jay? No powerful than Rome. The American Imperium. No? Or am I wrong? Okay. At any rate, I digress. Let me get back to my book. Where was I? Okay. I say, we had, after all, started out on a dizzying high note. What with a laudatory constitution, overwhelming international goodwill, and the epic personage and moral power of Nelson Mandela. We had expected the normalization to be kept in abeyance for some time yet. We had expected the enchanting rhythm and romance of struggle and freedom to linger just a little longer. What went wrong? The answer is of course ascribable to many factors. There is never one cause that accounts for the wrong turn. In our case, there was the fact that the apartheid regime had not been defeated and vanquished. Thus, the 1994 deal was a compromise that left the structure of property relations and thus life chances largely undisturbed. To be born black necessarily meant starting with a huge disadvantage, and to be born white meant facing a more benign and inviting future. And so the mechanism for the deracialization of the economy became a critical juncture in the new dispensation, leading to a veritable scramble for limited resources, a proverbial black-on-black carnage. With the ANC, the glue of the new South Africa, at the epicenter of the maelstrom, there was also the crippling legacy of bad education. I'm not sure you are aware of bad education. You know, in 1954, the apartheid regime decided to introduce an inferior system of education for black people. Poison, essentially, that would make black people pewers of wood and drawers of water. That's the phrase, eh? Pewers of wood and drawers of water. Essentially just surplus labor for the apartheid economy. So there was a deliberate attempt to subvert black intellectual capital. And the Boers, if there was one thing they succeeded in, it was that. So it's a landmine that has detonated under the new dispensation. There was a crippling legacy of bad education, which had left most of our people without the requisite skills to navigate and flourish in a modern, technologically advanced economy. Hence, politics, and thus the ANC, became the default skill and resource to leverage for most folks who wanted to get ahead. In a sense, politics became an indispensable tool for advancement in the new South Africa. And the few with skills and talent decided to eschew this conflagration and headed towards the private sector, leaving the ANC and the political project in general an exclusive realm of, with a few exceptions, the mediocre. I have titled this book Soul of a Nation, a quest for the rebirth of South Africa's true value. Following an article titled The Rebirth of Cool, which I published in 2009 in Black Renaissance Noir, a political and cultural journal published by the Institute of African American Studies at New York University, and in the Sunday Times locally. Borrowing its sensibility from Miles Davis' Birth of the Cool album, the article sought to examine the oratorical and governing style of the US first black president, Barack Obama, which are likened to the cool aesthetic that Miles epitomized. Obama's first inauguration speech was christened the Rebirth of Freedom, based on the phrase, a new birth of freedom, from Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, given in the midst of America's Civil War. Rebirth is a critical vector of my life's philosophy. It is about falling down and getting up, to begin again, in the immortal words of the novelist James Baldwin. The constant quest for perfection a dialectical process of slumps and triumphs, a recognition that history, or life for that matter, is not linear. It zigs and zags, but with awareness, humility, and determination, it can be steered towards our desires, birthing something new and desirable, the rebirth of our nation through the rebirth of a values framework. Accordingly, one of my favorite poems is The Daffodils by William Wordsworth. I want to read the what you call. Daffodils bloom in spring, and spring is the paradigmatic lineament for rebirth, following the death of winter. Buddhists have a saying to convey this phenomenon of rebirth, symbolized by spring. Winter always turns into spring. Isn't that true? Whatever difficulties, the winter of our discontent we may be traversing, let us always remember that spring awaits ineluctably. It was thus opposite for me in contemplating the current winter of our despair as a republic, buffeted by load shedding, crumbling infrastructure, failing schools in our township and rural areas, dysfunctional hospitals, the galloping corruption of the Zondo Commission laid bare, and the general political malaise and disaffection sweeping our country, to also force myself to imagine a different, brighter future for all of us. For if winter is our current reality, surely if we try harder, spring can be our future. I wrote this book to help us ponder our current conjuncture of failure and dysfunction, and imagine ways and means to get to a better place. The book is divided into 3 parts. Part 1 describes the evolution of my consciousness from an early age, influenced by such events as the student rebellion of 16th June 1976, which occurred when I was 13. The death of Steve Biko, whose funeral I attended with my father when I was 14 years old, and joining the ANC underground at the age of 17, and driven into exile in the protective bosom of Chris Hani, whose influence on me resonates to this day. Part 2 explores the current conjuncture and its discontents, beginning with the promise of the democratic breakthrough of 1994, and moving on to the reality of state capture, economic hardship, and corruption. As everyone recognizes, the new South Africa had a healthy start with a negotiated settlement that confounded skeptics globally. These skeptics thought that a powerful entity like the apartheid state could not surrender power without the country being plunged into a civil war with enormous suffering and loss of life. Perhaps because of the suffusion of the spirit of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is an African philosophy that basically says, I am because you are. It's almost like namaste, you know? Namaste, it's the same thing, you know? And that is what is supposed to define our spirituality. You know, what does Descartes say? I think, therefore I am. You know, we don't say that. We say, I am because you are. So I can't imagine me existing outside of Jacob, and Charles, and Ted, and Sukran, the all of you. You know, that's a Western kind of concept. Sorry, Ted. That's a Cartesian concept. It's not African. It is not even for what matter Indian. You know. Sorry, I got carried away. South Africa, although never exactly an oasis of peace and prosperity, avoided the type of calamities, civil wars and gender. It did not become a broken society like those roiled by civil war often are. We have only to reflect on what happened in Angola, Congo, Syria and elsewhere, where conflict virtually plunges those politics into near collapse, to appreciate the miracle of the 1994 democratic breakthrough. But the Republic is ailing. Indeed, we seem to have lost our way completely. Although the rivers of blood that were predicted never came to pass, we have been in the grip of low-intensity conflict for years. The people of this nation suffer from a soaring crime rate, the common occurrence of violence against women and children, high unemployment, and diminishing economic prospects. We now seem to be sleepwalking, if not exactly galloping towards the collapse predicted by the naysayers 30 years ago. We need an elixir. That imagined elixir is the focus of part 3 of the book. What do we do to get out of our current wintry conditions and access the relief and sunshine of spring? The goal is to envision a different future, to experience a rebirth from South Africa's current malaise and decrepitude. I think I'll stop there. It's indeed difficult to do a reading for a book that people haven't read. I think only Jacob has read this book here. I'll avail a few one for Ochoro, one for Ted, one for Sukran, and unfortunately I didn't bring.
Oyama, it was such a big change from last time I remember seeing you, so it's a good change.
Do you remember last time?
You were the height of corporate, as Jay was saying, right, in South Africa.
I came to visit you in your office.
Yes,
at
you
Tata.
did, yes.
And I said, you
Long time back.
you sat behind your desk. You didn't even come to meet me at the Taj Mahal.
We met there?
No, you said, no, come to my office, man.
Oh,
I'm too busy, So I'd walk from Taj Mahal to Tata headquarters. I found Sukran there officially.
You have gone further ahead, Oyama.
Pardon?
You have gone further ahead into better things,
Where's my hat? The parade.
Guys, good to see you.
Oh,
We have our preservation in 5 minutes.
so let's go.
Shall we have the discussion there?
Yeah. All right, let's regroup and discuss over there. But first of all, bravo.
Thank you.
Magnificent. Magnificent.